Now it's time for our guest speaker. Just bear with me because the bio is longer than his book. So I suggest you buy his book because it's a quick read. Anyway, our guest speaker today is Counsel General Motors on issues surrounding the Chevy Volt, the U.S. government divestiture of GM stock, the revival of GM's European operations, and other corporate and product issues, including the recent recall conundrum regarding the ignition switch. In addition, he's been involved with public policy issues regarding electrification of the nation's automobile fleet. He has also counseled a chemical client in reputational restoration, a major Native American tribe currently under attack by various agencies inside the federal U.S. government and the U.S. Auto Dealers National Association. He served as the top communications professional for 3 automakers, Nissan North America, Ford Motor Company, and Chrysler Group, between 1998 and 2008. He was named top PR professional in the automotive industry in 1999, 2005, and 2006 by Automotive News, the industry's lead trade publication. He is credited with leading some of the most memorable product launches in the automotive history, including the Chrysler 300, Jeep Grand Cherokee, Dodge Viper, Dodge Ram, and the reborn Nissan 350Z. At Chrysler, he successfully led the company against allegations of sudden acceleration with the Jeep Grand Cherokee. The vehicle was exonerated by the National Highway Safety Administration. Then in 1997, amidst some regulators and media predicting huge injury and fatality numbers among children coming in contact with deployed airbags, he helped conceive and institute The Back is Where It's At, a nationwide elementary education program encouraging children 13 and under to ride safely in the back seat. The predicted crisis never materialized as 95% of all schools in the country used the curriculum. It is still considered one of the most impactful passenger safety programs in U.S. history. He joined Nissan in 1998 as the company was on the brink of bankruptcy and in short order helped restore their image, becoming the industry comeback story just 2 years later. His work resulted in his first honor from Automotive News as the best in the business. He was recruited by Ford Motor Company in early 2000 as head of global communications. Just weeks after his arrival, the Ford Firestone tire crisis began to simmer before turning into the biggest automotive crisis in history, pitting 2 100-year-old companies in a struggle for survival. Ford was eventually exonerated by NHTSA after spending more than $48 billion replacing Firestone tires on its customers' vehicles after Firestone refused to replace their defective tires. He is also Director Emeritus of the Automotive Hall of Fame. Let's give a warm welcome to Jason Vines.
Good to be here today. On the way in through the snow, and I can still drive in the snow even though I live in North Carolina, I heard a news report that scientists are predicting that if the Earth loses its gravitational pull, the lower peninsula of Michigan will be swallowed by Ohio because Ohio State sucks. I want to mix it up a little bit, but I got a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, the last time I was here speaking to a Chrysler group, I was the VP of PR at Chrysler. And as you remember, we were going in the tank again. And we were cutting employee benefits, but we were also cutting retiree benefits. And one man in particular in the Q&A got up and got very emotional. His name's John Glotzbach. And I was trying to defend the company, but I was an ass. And I was rude to John. And I want to say, John, I'm sorry. Having said that, John, being a young Michigan State grad, hired by Chrysler in HR, I oftentimes spent time in John's office where he showed me charts that I didn't understand, but I was young. So today, I want to thank you for making me feel young again because I didn't understand any of your charts. I want to point, where are you, Jeff Seibert? Is it yrock.org? I want you all to go sometime, today or tomorrow, at warriorinstitute.com or .org? .org. Jeff and his daughter started a mission to help Marines who've suffered TBIs, traumatic brain injuries, and post-traumatic stress syndrome. And he's working with Marines at Camp Lejeune with East Carolina, and he's doing a hell of a job. He did it with his own money. I helped him get a little bit of a grant from General Motors. But these are the men and women who put their life on the line for us. So I hope you'll support Jeff. And a round of applause for a Chrysler retiree. Some sad news. Tom Kowaleski died yesterday. Yeah. Had a heart attack. But I'm not going to bring us down because I want to tell a Tom Kowaleski story. Tom and I were in Portland, Oregon, scouting out a potential launch site for the Eagle Talon, and we had our early Talon with us. And we drove up to Mount Hood, and we stopped at the lodge where they shot part of The Shining. And then we proceeded to go into the mountain. And finally we ran out of road because even though it was 70 in Portland, up in the mountains, it was in the 30s and there was snow. A sign by the road said, "Out of season, do not enter." But not Tom Kowaleski. And so we took the Eagle Talon. Remember, it was all-wheel drive. We could go anywhere. At first, it was an inch of snow, then 2, then 6, then 12. And then the Eagle Talon would go no further. We got out of the Talon and proceeded to find sticks to try to dig ourselves out. I was in flip-flops because it was 70 degrees in Portland. We tried to dig ourselves out for an hour. And I kept looking over my shoulder. And Tom says, "What do you keep looking at?" I said, "I'm worried about bears." He started laughing and laughing. Finally, we gave up. It was about 4:45 in the afternoon, and the sun was starting to go down. So we started to hike, and I kept looking over my shoulder. He goes, "Would you stop it with the bear thing?" We came upon a house finally after about 5 miles. It had the lights on, and in front were, I think, 15 or 20 broken down cars and trucks. For Tom, it was deliverance, as in, we're saved. For me, it was deliverance, as in the Burt Reynolds, Ned Beatty movie. 2 guys came out of the house with shotguns, and we told them of our plight, and they agreed to give us a ride to the ranger station. So we got in the back of their car, we moved 2 shotguns, and a 5-gallon can of gasoline, and a big trash thing full of empty beer cans. I was scared to death. We got to the ranger station, we met with the ranger, and Tom started giving me a bunch of crap to the ranger about how I was afraid of getting eaten by a bear. And the ranger looked at me, and he looked at Tom, and he goes, "There's the reason they call this station 7 Bears Station." As I said on a blog this morning about this, at that point, Tom gulped, and I soiled myself. But that was Tom Kowaleski, and he really busted his butt for this company. I've got a new book out, my first book. It's called "What Did Jesus Drive?" A lot of Chrysler people in it. If you haven't read it, no, I'm okay, I think. If you haven't read it, you go, why did you call it that? What did Jesus drive? And I'll tell you. But the original working title was A Thermal Event, which happens to be chapter 1 of the book. As a young PR guy, I was put in charge of safety and regulatory. Just a couple weeks into the job, a couple of the lawyers came down and said, "Hey, we have to do a recall for the Dodge Dakota." It was a wire harnessing issue. I go, "Wow, I haven't written a press release yet for a recall." He goes, "Oh, it doesn't matter. We always write the first draft." I looked at it, and it basically said, if you don't get this vehicle fixed, it could result in a thermal event. And I said, "What in the hell's a thermal event?" He goes, "Well, the vehicle could catch on fire." I was like, holy crap! then say it. And that's kind of the basis for the book. I say in the book, sadly, I start it and end it with the same question. Why do we have such a hard time telling the truth these days? Whether it's the NFL or Lois Lerner, Richard Nixon, Bill Clinton, it's gotten out of hand. So why did I call it, Why Did Jesus Drive? What did Jesus drive? Two reasons. Back in 2002, 2003, I think you'll remember, SUVs were under attack. Arianna Huffington said you were supporting terrorists if you drove an SUV. A bunch of evangelicals formed a group called What Would Jesus Drive? And they met with the automakers to try to shame them to stop making SUVs. And they said to SUV owners, you're sinning if you drive an SUV. The industry was a little bit paralyzed. But what was worse of these two groups, they seemed a little bit innocuous. There was a group called the Earth Liberation Front, or ELF. They got their start by putting spikes in trees that caused loggers to lose their arms or die. Well, they moved on from trees, and they moved to SUV dealerships and started burning SUV dealerships across the country. So Arianna Huffington and the What Would Jesus Drive people were aiding and abetting these terrorists. No single auto company wanted to go up against them. Arianna Huffington and the evangelicals. But we did. I was part of an agency that still existed, Stratacom, and we proposed to the big three that if they would fund us through advertising, we would be the voice against what I felt were hypocrites. Arianna Huffington lives in a mansion in LA. She flies private jets, but yet she could tell the average American what he or she could drive. And the evangelicals, even though I'm a proud Christian, they just didn't get it. So we formed a group that had about 5,000 members. We were a nonprofit. We were supported by the RV industry and the boating industry, which likes SUVs. And then I found Jesus. He lived in Waterford, Michigan. His name was Jesus Rivera. He was a General Motors retiree. He had 2 SUVs. And I went out to meet with him. He went by Jesse, but for me, he was Jesus. And I told him what we were up against. And I told him, it's not enough that these evangelicals are crazy and that Arianna Huffington is a hypocrite, but people were dying, or our firefighters were on the front line at burning SUV dealerships. And he asked me how he could help. I said, I want to take your picture beside your SUV, and I want to give you $500 because we're going to place an ad with you. And so 2 weeks later, in USA Today, in Detroit, LA, Washington, and New York, there was a full-page ad that says, what does Jesus drive? We asked him. We had a little verbiage about who Jesus was, that he was a Vietnam vet, he was Hispanic, he was a grandfather, he was our savior for SUVs. Well, the ad exploded. It cost us $25,000 to make the ad and place it. We got an estimated $50 million of free coverage. That night, I was on Hardball with Chris Matthews. It had not been my first time at his rodeo. I was there twice before during the Firestone tire crisis. And I was against the Reverend Jim Egder. He's the late Jim Egder now. He was a former congressman who was second in command at What Would Jesus Drive? And we were going to go in a debate. Well, the Reverend started by character assassination of me. Didn't talk about the issue. It's just that, oh, gads, this guy had worked for the auto industry. He must be evil. This went on for a couple minutes, character assassination after character assassination. Finally, when it was my turn, I smiled. I said, Chris, you know, I'm a Christian myself, but I find it really tacky that a man of the cloth resorts to character assassination instead of talking about the issue at hand. Edgar was back on his heels, and then Matthews went on the attack. And the issue, within a couple weeks, was over. You don't hear people saying you're evil if you have an SUV anymore. The second part of why it's called What Did Jesus Drive? Back in the summer of 2009, I was going up to the Mackinac Conference, and I get a call from a 616 area code number. I pick up the phone, I go, Jason Vines. He goes, Jason, an old friend, Steve Salmons. Steve and I had worked together at Nissan. I said, what are you doing calling from a 616 area code? Because I knew him in California. Are you in Grand Rapids or something? He goes, yeah, I'm the chief marketing officer for Zondervan. I said, Zondervan? The Bible company? He goes, yeah, we're in a little bit of a pinch. The last time we tried to retranslate the most popular version of the Bible, the NIV, the translators went a little too far and the evangelical community went nuts and they boycotted the Bible. In fact, a Bible was delivered to Zondervan headquarters with a bullet hole through it. What did Jesus shoot? He goes, we're going to try the retranslation again. He goes, but we have to have help in navigating through a crisis or to mitigate one. He goes, do you have anybody you'd recommend? I go, well, why don't I do it? He goes, that's why I called you. And I said to him, I thought Christianity was dead. At least I read that on the cover of Newsweek a few weeks ago. Well, I went to work with them, and the old adage of keep your friends close and your enemies closer, that's exactly what we did. And we reached out to the evangelical community and said, we want you to be a part of this. We want to listen to you, your problems with a prior retranslation. And we let the Committee on Bible Translation go to work. They had the product in hand. We had to announce that we were going to do this retranslation, and we did it at the site of the original NIV press conference in 1958 in Trinity College outside of Chicago. All our enemies were on the line. And that night, I was in a Chicago hotel with my wife, who I hadn't been seeing very often because I lived in Grand Rapids, and she lived in our home in Franklin. And she was tired, and we were laying in bed, and Conan O'Brien comes on. In his opening monologue, he says, there's going to be a new translation of the Bible which brings it up to contemporary language. He said, let me give you an example. On the seventh day, God chillaxed. And I stood up in my boxers, bouncing like Mary Lou Retton, because we got into the lexicon of the comedians, and I knew we were solid going forward. They launched it. I left Donovan about 4 months later, but I blew the story because after that press conference, very successful because there was no bad news. The next day I was driving home to my apartment in Grand Rapids, and I thought I'd reach out to the lead translator, a scholarly man with a great sense of humor, but still a very holy person, a college professor as well. His name is Doug Moo. And all during this process, we had mixed it up all along. He was a liberal, I'm a conservative, and we couldn't see eye to eye on politics, but we had become friends. And I called him and I said, Doug, can I have a favor? He goes, anything you want. I said, when you're starting the translation of the Bible, is there any way you could throw my name in there once and make my mom really proud of me? I thought in that split second that this smartass from Iowa had gone too far. But without missing a beat, he says, what are you talking about? Vines is in there at least 19 times. I wrote the book to tell a story, and it's just not my story. It's not just about the auto industry. But I wanted to show examples of when companies do it right and when they don't do it right. Chrysler is not the biggest part of this book. Ford Motor Company is with the Ford Firestone tire crisis. But I say the first real crisis I was in was the A604. Put a little salt down that wound, huh? I was brought in as the second PR guy. Tony Cervone was doing it at first, and then I took his job as we were swapping jobs all the time. And I say in the book, what moron names a transmission? And the fact is, transmissions had always been named in the past, but marketing had called it Ultra Drive. But as we all know, Ultra Drive wasn't ready. But where I'm proud of what Chrysler did was they stood by the customer. And I say that as in all crises, for companies getting ready or organizations getting ready for a crisis, get ready in advance, set up guiding principles, just 3 or 4, and this is the way you're going to act, and nothing else is going to trump it. We did that at Ford during the Firestone tire crisis. We had 4 guiding principles at Ford. One was the safety and satisfaction of your customer has to be paramount. Full stop. 2, you got to communicate openly and honestly at all times. 3, we would look around the world 24/7 to find replacement tires. And 4, protect Firestone. A lot of people couldn't believe that was one of the guiding principles during the Firestone tire crisis, because we knew if they went down, they were going to bring us down because we couldn't source tires fast enough. And by the way, they were going to bring down General Motors and Toyota as well. And by the way, that's what the safety advocates tried to do, because for them, every tire that was round and black was defective, because they were working for their plaintiff attorney buddies. Those people, like Joan Claybrook and Clarence Ditlow, put citizens in harm's way with their actions, because people with perfectly good tires were going into Ford dealerships and demanding the dealer give them new tires, even though they weren't on the recall. And most of our dealers at the time, Ford dealers, they cared about their customer, maybe long-term customer, and they said, okay, I'll take care of you, which meant people with bad tires had to wait longer. And that's what those safety advocates do. They don't put the customer first. Yeah, they do. They're plaintiff's attorney buddies. That's who they put first. I'm very proud of Ford Motor Company in this book. I don't know if you saw the dust up in late October. Ford European PR chief Mark Truby, you might know that name, former Detroit News reporter. He and I are very close friends, and in August, the book launched in November. In August, he called me, goes, Jace, Ford's really nervous about your book. I go, they shouldn't be. I said, I'll send it to you. You just can't share it with anybody. And he read it in a day. He called back, he goes, this is a really good book. And you're right, Ford ought to sponsor your book tour. 2 weeks before the book came out, a young lady who's in the book, Susan Cruzel, who's Bill Ford's personal PR person, called me. She goes, Bill is really nervous about this book. I said, well, I'll send it to you. And she called back a week later. She goes, we're going to put out a statement. I said, what about? She goes, well, we're going to kind of dispute the fact that you said your office was bugged at Ford Motor Company, which it was. But we're also going to say some really nice things about you. And I said, you know what? Can I give you some free PR advice as your former boss? I wouldn't do that. You're just going to raise the view of the book. Well, sure enough, they did. They put the statement out, and of course, it got big news here. Their statement was pathetic. It didn't deny that my office was bugged. But it did say something really nice about me. And I can't believe they used this word, but they said, when I was in a leadership position at Ford, I worked tirelessly. Yes, I did. There were no tires. I got fired, I think, on a Thursday, after we were exonerated by NHTSA after 17 long months. And Jack Nasser and I were at a Think event, a really, really stupid electric car. And when we got back, I walk into my office, and my secretary, Lynn Quigley, looked at me and she goes, the big guy needs you. And I looked at her and I said, I'm not coming back. And I walked up from my floor to the next level, And as I was walking past the head of human resources, David Murphy, who had started with Jack Nasser as grade 1 employees in Australia, he walked out and started walking next to me. He said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I think you're going to the same place I am." And we went into Jack's office, and he was sitting at this glass table, and he pushed over copies of the press release announcing that he was resigning and that Bill Ford would take over his position. He said, "You two guys are going with me." And I said I wouldn't have it any other way. A half hour later, we were at Jack's condo at the TPC, just across the street from Ford Motor Company. And there was David and I, the executive assistants came by, many of them in tears. And then the security guards, who I'd gotten very close to, came by. And that's how I know my office was bugged, because I asked the main one, I said, "How long's my office been bugged?" He goes, "Oh, a couple months." I said, "What about my car?" He goes, "I would trade that in." The wine poured, and it was really expensive wine, but I wasn't in the mood for wine right then. I hadn't seen a lot of my family in the last year and a half. So I got in my car, and when I pulled into the garage, my daughter was at the door, and she says, "Hi, Dad." I said, "Hi, honey. I got fired." She looked at me, she goes, "Does that mean you can drive me to school tomorrow?" I said, "Yes, it does, cutie. Yes, it does." I've had a really blessed career because I've been able to work with great people like are in this room. I don't know if I'll get into the real Hall of Fame, but if I were lucky enough, I said I was the head of the Hall of Fame. If I'm ever lucky enough, I hope to go in. I get to pick my uniform. I'll go in as Chrysler. And I'm going to end on this little story because I'd like to get questions because that's where I have the most fun. I'm speaking at Oakland University tonight, and I love to get around students because it's, impact their brains of mush. But BBDO had suggested, and if you've read the book, you know the story, to do an ad campaign with Dieter Zetsche in 2005. It would be in response to the employee ads that GM had snookered the American public with. It was the most brilliant marketing idea of all industries of all time. Because actually the vehicles became more expensive in some cases. But everybody assumed employee pricing had to be the best. And we at Chrysler and Ford, we were caught with our pants down. So we needed something to break through the clutter. So BBDO came up with the idea to use Dieter Zetsche. I wasn't wild about that idea. Outside the automotive community, no one knew him. And I didn't want this great engineer to come across to the American people the first time they see him as a huckster for cars. But they went ahead and made up storyboards, and we met with the BBDO team in Dieter's conference room with myself, Dieter, and Joe Eberhardt. And they took him through a few of the storyboards for the Dieter ads, and suddenly Dieter stopped and said, "Jason, Joe, I need you to come with me." And we walked into his room, his office, and he says, "I will do the ads, but do you think it would be a good idea if you knew I was going to become the new chairman of Daimler in 25 days? We were like, "Whoa." The good guy finally won. And I said, "There's no way you're doing these ads." So Joe and I went back into the room without Dieter. And Joe said, "We're not using Dieter. We need another plan, and Jason and I need to do some work." Joe and I sat down. He goes, "Who are we going to get to do these?" I thought it only took a few seconds. I said, "The ultimate car salesman, Lee Iacocca." And Joe was like, "You think you can get him?" I go, "Yeah, I think so." We went back to Dieter, and we told him our idea. And he goes, "Holy shit." "You expect me to sell this to Jürgen Shrimp?" In my mind, I was thinking, well, that's why you get paid the big bucks, but I didn't say anything. And he said, Well, that's why I get paid a lot of money, I guess. We got Lido, as you all know. The ads were okay. They weren't great. The third one I thought was great, the one with Snoop Dogg. And I would talk with Lee during all the shoots. And during that one, it was 110 degrees. And he goes, there was one trailer that said, Mr. Iacocca on it. And the other trailer said, Mr. Dog. And Lido said he always had weird smells coming out of Mr. Dog's trailer. But at one point, I got this from Hugh Broder, who was on the shoot. Lido and Snoop were mic'd up but off camera. They weren't shooting at that point, but they could hear everything they said. And Lido looked over at Snoop Dogg and said, I know your name is Calvin Brodus, so I'm going to call you Calvin. He goes, that's okay, Mr. Iacocca. And Lido says, my granddaughters are really, really happy I'm doing these commercials with you. He goes, well, my grandmother's really happy I'm doing commercials with you. Can I open this up for questions? Oh, I'm not a very good PR guy. Buy the book. You can get it here or you can get it online at Amazon.com. And please, I'm serious, warriorinstitute.org. I've been working with Jeff for about 2 years on this. He got 501c3 status. Lois Lerner must have not been paying attention that day. But they're already doing wonderful work. And I've been down with him to Camp Lejeune, and you meet these young men and women, and it breaks your heart. 22 veterans are killing themselves every day. And those are the ones we know about. They're making a difference. The DOD can't do it by themselves. We know the VA can't do it by themselves. So organizations like Jeff's and are doing fabulous work, but they could all use your support. And to spread the word, if you have a network among you, tell them to go to the site. It's a Chrysler guy that's doing this. So, any questions? Oh,
I'll give you this. Okay. I'll take the other one. Cool. That way we can get the questions.
Test? Yeah, good. Anybody have any questions? Right. Oh.
Jason, where will you be speaking tonight at Open University?
At Elliott Hall, Ken McCarter invited me to speak with his class.
Jason, could you stay close to this so we can get some audio?
Yeah.
Thanks, sorry. I know that's not easy. I know that's not easy for you to stay in one spot.
That's the longest I've stayed still. I'm tonight at Oakland University. Last week I was in Rochester, University of Rochester. I'm going to Arizona, Utah State, Brandeis. Unless they find, not at Brandeis if they find out I'm a conservative, because whenever you have a conservative, Brandeis will kill you. But
Yeah, the first time I saw you was many years ago. You were doing stand-up comedy at Comedy Castle. That's the same Jason, isn't it? You do that anymore?
yeah, I know I don't do that anymore. I got to the point, I was working full-time at Chrysler, and it hadn't hurt my career because a lot of people were listening to Dick Purton because I was Dr. Dewalkis from Professional Veterinary Hospital, and I was Clint Eastwood and Andy Rooney, and Dick Purton would not allow me to do my favorite voice on the radio, and that was Pee Wee Herman. Until Pee Wee got in trouble. And he called me in a panic that morning. He goes, I need you to do Pee Wee Herman. I go, maybe I don't want to. The late Gene Taylor, he and I wrote the script in about 10 minutes, and it was really borderline, especially when you consider the name of Mr. Purton. So if you get my drift. I got to the point, though, thanks, gentlemen. I got to the point where I was getting good enough at comedy that I was starting to anger the lead guys. Because you need a crescendo in comedy. You want your MC to be okay, you want your middle act to be better, but your headliner needs to be. And of course, most of the headliners weren't from here, so I was getting good and knew local stuff. And so Mark Ridley said, you got to make a decision whether or not you're going to be a comedian or an auto exec. And I decided to do both by staying at Chrysler. Got one.
What was the root cause of the A604 fiasco, and why did it take so long for the company to fix it?
Well, they never fixed it. No, seriously. Well, what it supposedly came down to was dust in the plant. Microscopic dust. Of course, when that was proposed as the problem, Denny Pauly went crazy. How you my plants you can eat off the floor. So I'm not sure it ever got resolved before I left, because I left in '98. I do know this, that the lawyers are mad at me because I was quoted many times saying, if you have an A604, you'll never have to pay for a new one. And that was used in lawsuit after lawsuit. But we had to do that because here was the problem. Consumer Reports had gone on a jihad against Chrysler, demanding a recall. And NHTSA, the biggest CYA agency in the federal government, was feeling the heat. So we had a meeting up on the 5th floor of that wonderful headquarters in Highland Park. It was Ted Cunningham and Steve Harris, Tom Gale, Francois Castang, and myself. And Kowaleski might have been in there as well. And we were debating whether to go on the attack against Consumer Reports or some other strategy. And at one point, Francois Castang says, I think we should clean their socks. And we started mixing it up again and fighting back and forth. And finally we looked over and Francois has tears running down his face as he's laughing. And Tom Gale goes, damn it, Francois, what's so funny? He goes, I think I meant clean their clocks, not their socks. There were certain words we knew we couldn't put in Francois' speeches going forward after we heard them. Fuckus was one. We must fuckus beyond the shit metal. Which reminds me of Jean Malbec. I'm just made the new tech PR person. And maybe I got Viper too at that point, because he had Viper with Roy. And he called me first time. He goes, Giselle, you're the new PR guy. I go, yes, I'm the new PR guy. He goes, I go, what? I'm going, I'm thinking, I'm the lowly PR guy. He's almost a vice president. I go, what? One more time. He goes, I finally went, yes. He goes, yes. I go, no. Okay, see you later. With the retrofit on the Jeeps with brake shift interlock, we were about the only people that didn't have it. But we knew that would stop people putting their foot on the wrong pedal. And we were the second biggest in the sudden acceleration hole after Audi. And after Craig Wynn and I really fought to have the shift interlock retrofitted, I got a call from Ron Boltz. So as I say in the book, hard ass sometimes, but maybe one of the top 5 guys I've ever worked with as far as brains. And I was his PR guy. He calls me after we make the announcement. Doesn't say hello, doesn't say hi. He just goes, do you realize you just cost this company $120 million? I'm a PR manager and this is a vice president. What could I say? He goes, good job. And he hung up. He's a very decent man. Anybody else? Oh,
The global warming advocates, what about them?
you are so yesterday. It's not global warming. And it's not even climate change anymore. It's climate disruption, I believe. I think I stand, even though it sounds like I take a shot at Bob Lutz on the back of page of Car and Driver. This month, I was trying to be funny, but the humor didn't come across in the pages when I said he had a big effing mouth. I stand with Bob Lutz in saying global warming is a crock of you know what. It is being driven purely by the universities to get funding. And it's a cruel hoax, and shame on Al Gore. He should have to give his Nobel Peace Prize back. They can't stand to get real facts, and they call people that don't believe in global warming deniers. I believe weather changes, but we sign an agreement. We sign an agreement with China that they can curb their emissions in 2030. Meanwhile, we, so much cleaner, have to do ours now? What's going on? I think we have the worst negotiator in the history of the United States in the White House.
Two-part question. How old are you today? How old will you be tomorrow?
I'm closer to 50 than I am 60 today, and tomorrow I'll be closer to 60 than 50. My wife said, "You want to go to Detroit on your birthday?" I go, "What would I do if I'm here in Wilmington? Go out in 70-degree weather and sit on my boat?" But I would rather not be any other place in the world, to be honest, than right here with my friends. Thank you. Got one. Bob?
You mentioned Consumer Reports, a magazine I've read since I was 9, and then I canceled my subscription when they plagiarized the Detroit News article about Chrysler 200. I'm just wondering, they have so much power in terms of car sales. Is there anything, what are your views on Consumer Reports? They seem to have hurt Chrysler, among other American car companies, tremendously over the years.
Well, you're right. First of all, you nailed it. You have to accept what they are or their perception. They are the Bible. So you can't screw around with that. You can call them to task if they're lying. They've done some shaky stuff over the years. The Isuzu Trooper. That was some really lousy testing, and it put the vehicle out of business. I talk in the book that early in, I think it was 89 or 90, Consumer Reports said something great about a couple of our vehicles for the first time. And Lido praised them. The next year, our quality went into the crapper, and Lido called Consumer Reports the pot pie and showerhead people. Love the man. So when the A604 problem started, Consumer Reports had a memory. And I will say this, led by Chris Theodore, they would listen a little bit. They showed them what the limp home mode was and convinced NHTSA that fixing them one by one was the right thing to do. Because had we had to recall all the vehicles with the A604, it would have cost us $2 billion, and we only, I believe at the time, had $1 billion. And we could not go back to the government for a second bailout in 1991, 1992. They wouldn't have had it. I mean, Chrysler and GM, both lucky. They're both lucky they went bankrupt at the same time. Had one gone, especially if Chrysler had gone bankrupt alone, there wouldn't be Chrysler anymore. But because it was too much to let fail. And I'm a free market Republican. I formed a group, we called it the Engine of Democracy, based on the arsenal of democracy. And we got the suppliers, their representatives, the dealers, and we marched to Washington and had representatives from every state with hockey jerseys on with the number of employees in their state because of the auto industry. And I believe we had some impact. In a 24-hour period, the three of us did, I think, 350 interviews. And it was so funny to do these interviews. A lot of them were FM stations. Had no clue what the auto industry was like. It was so 1970s in their mind. They didn't realize that the little screw manufacturer, those screws went into a panel, went into a car, and that the little cafe that everybody eats at that works at the screw factory is there because of the auto industry. We did a lot of education, but there's a cottage industry of haters of the auto industry because they don't get it, or they don't want to get it. I mean, Germany would not think twice about bailing out one of its automakers. They would do it. So would Japan did. As I say in the book, Nissan got a $500 million you don't have to pay it back loan from the Japanese government because it's too vital. And we are too vital.
We have 2 online questions.
2 online.
We'll cut it off.
Okay, I'm going to read these to you. The first one is from Nora. He says, how is the PR decal on the tower installed?
How was the what?
The PR decal.
The PR decal?
It's a wrap. It's a wrap on the building. It's basically a static cling, is what it is.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
It's a seat.
And by the way, it's greatest advertising. Although I'm surprised they're still allowed to do it, considering it's a.
The first time it happened, I can say it was
Yeah, when?
April 1st, PT launch, crashing through the glass.
That's right.
Stopped traffic.
Yeah.
We were stopped for a while because PR did it again for the second time. We did the marketing first time. PR did it the second time. Got stuck in the city of Troy or Auburn Hills, said can't do it anymore. After some arguing and fighting, they allowed us to do it. Jay, microphone. Sorry, but that's how.
Okay. Yeah, the first time they did it was with PT Cruiser, and it had a car crashing out of the building. And but the city of Troy got afraid it was a diversion for drivers on I-75. Because, people on I-75 around that area only go about 25 or 30, right?
That's what it is. It's static cling, basically.
Static cling.
Okay, static cling. Jason, the last question. It says, from Fred, comments online say that Tom Kowalewski, who died as a Lions reporter, not a Chrysler PR man. Does Jamie know for sure?
He died as a what?
Alliance reporter?
No.
He worked for us.
Different guy.
That's Kowalski.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. No. Tom left Chrysler, went to GM with Steve, and then took over, and then didn't play very well in the media. And then they fired Tom and brought Steve back. Tom ended up at BMW for a little while, and then he went to work for Ford on the Lincoln brand with the what's the name? Detroit. What's the agency that does the ads for Ford? Team Detroit.
Team Detroit.
Kind of under that account. So he taught a lot of PR people very well, and I'm one of those. I really learned. I didn't always get along with Tom, but he was passionate. He was passionate about cars, passionate about life. I will say to this day, most journalists will say the greatest press preview was the Viper GTS. It was fabulous, and a few of the guys, Herbie and a few others are in the room. We started at the Nürburgring, then we went to Spa, and then we went to Reims, and then we drove into Paris, 13 Vipers, in the middle of rush hour, around the Arc de Triomphe, did a few circles. This is in rush hour traffic, and then down the Champs-Élysées or whatever it's called. We were all on fumes. My wife was in the car with me. Seriously, my meter said below empty. And I'm thinking, if these things run out of gas, they'll kill us. But and Tom and I did that one together, and it was fantastic. And I'm going to tell one more story if I can, because I mentioned Herb. Herb did something that I think was one of the funniest things in my career. We were getting ready to ready to launch the original Viper. And Lutz and Francois and Tom wanted to see the marketing pitch and wanted to see the PR pitch. And marketing, typical, I'm not taking a shot at marketing, even though I am. They had the same, bungee jumping and all this stuff. And Lutz was like, something that needs to be different. Well, we got up there with our PR plan. And in it, we said we're going to give them American wine in their room when they check in. Each journalist, American wine and American beer and a videotape. And what it was the car just getting thrashed out at the proving grounds. Professional driver, great, just pumped you crazy to magic carpet ride. At the end of it, the camera's on me driving, and I had my Jack Nicholson glasses on. And I said, if you can't get laid in this car, you're uglier than effing Yoda or something. E.T., you're uglier than effing E.T. Well, we showed it at that internal thing, and Lutz was like, that is fantastic. Well, that didn't make the cut for the journalist. We didn't want it, but that was just for the meeting. So Herbie, after the launch, comes into my office one day and says, hey, where's that Viper video that we gave to the media? I go, it's over there. I want to use it for my daughter's 7th grade class. So Herbie brings a Viper to elementary school. And he's all proud, and his daughter's proud of him. And he puts in the videotape, and he goes to the back of the room. And it's playing, and the kids are singing. And then suddenly, my image came on the screen. and Herb set a land speed record in getting to the VCR to shut it off. I thank you for being here, and keep up the good work. I will soon be a retiree myself. And John, I need a deck of your slides.